So I'd like to give you some background information that will help you more fully understand my work. My primary residence is in the Midwest, although I do spend a significant amount of time in New Orleans. I raised a family and have a master's degree in clinical social work. I was in private practice for 30-some years and have traveled quite a bit, all of which have contributed to my understanding of the human condition. I have always used the camera to try to better understand the world around me. I started taking photographs later in life, in my 40s, after taking a class at a local art center. My teacher, Dick Olderman, was inspirational and taught me to see the poetry in photography. I also began a daily journaling practice which led me to crystallize a critical concern in my life, which was, and still is, my feeling connected and/or separated to myself and to others. This has fueled most of my photographic inquiries. I'd like to start with this painting that I came across at the Yale Art Museum by John Balsari, Solving Each Problem as It Arises. It can be a subject matter of a religious nature, a scene in a foreign country. Whatever the subject, the professional artist makes exhaustive studies of it. When he feels that he's interpreted the subject to the extent of his capabilities, he may have a one-man exhibition whose theme is the solution of the problem. It is surprising how few people who view the paintings realize this. In looking more deeply into the issue of separation and connection, I realized that the very first separation that occurs for each and every one of us is at birth, the moment the umbilical cord is cut. How do we all come into existence? How do we enter the world? Is there any conscious memory of when this happens? No matter where we are or where we're from or who we are, we all go through the same universal experience. It's just part of being human. One of my earliest images, which I showed in my very first exhibit at a coffee shop in Evanston, foreshadows the theme of my photographic explorations. I really love the photograph because it referenced both birth and death in one single image. This is my daughter. She's emerging out of the lake, but it also, for me, references a death mask. I love the image, and I just wasn't sure how I was ever going to be able to create something like that again. In my interest of trying to understand our beginnings, I offered to photograph pregnant women and home births. Oops. This photograph was made shortly after my next-door neighbor's home birth. All this exploration led me to a series which was really the first conceptual body of work I created, which was based on my curiosity and inquiry into connection and separation. This work was titled Before the Butterflies. Is this a chrysalis or is it a body bag? Maybe it's both. I'd like to share a quote from a book titled Each Moment is the Universe, Zen and the Way of Being Time by Danon Katagori. One aspect of time is to separate, the other is to connect. The aspect of time that separates you from others is the human world. The aspect of time that connects you to others is universal truth. You are connected to all beings in time, which permeates into every inch of the cosmic universe and space, where everyone and everything exists together in peace and harmony. So you are you, but you don't exist alone. You are connected. I remember showing this piece to some people, and they didn't understand the black space, and they suggested putting trees in the background or whatever. The black space for me references the idea of the place where we all come from and maybe where we all return to. These ideas are still forming, and it feels more important than ever after some significant losses in my life. So you can't really fully appreciate or understand birth and life without coming to terms with death and dying. I've spent years, years, exploring one of the greatest mysteries of life, the final separation. Socrates wrote in the text of the last days, quote, "To be afraid of death is only another form of thinking that one is wise when one is not. It is to think that one knows what one does not know. No one knows, with regard to death, whether it is not really the greatest blessing that can happen to man. But people dread it as though they were certain it is the greatest evil." Unquote. In our culture, discussing death and dying has been a taboo subject for many years, even though it is the only thing that is certain in our lives. I found that I needed to seek out places and situations where I could learn more about death and dying, especially since up to that point I had had no significant losses in my life. I had heard how the Mexican culture celebrated the deceased on their Day of the Dead holiday, so I traveled to Oaxaca, Mexico to learn more about it. What I found was an openness not only to the subject of death, but also a celebration of those who have gone before. The cemeteries were gathering places on the evening of the holiday. Families would place multiple candles on the gravesite, gather, and have a special meal and enjoy each other's company. The children would often be playing in and around the grave sites. Every home also creates an altar for their loved ones, placing their favorite food and drink along with other treasured items with hopes that the spirits would return for a visit. I also traveled to Varanasi, India, one of the holiest sites in the country on the Ganges River. Most Indians' final wish is that of being transported to Varanasi to be cremated and having their ashes released into the river. I spent 4 days there, trying to more fully understand their beliefs and rituals around death and dying. It was very intense to actually witness a funeral pyre consuming the human body. In trying to more fully understand death and dying, I thought a slaughterhouse would be a good place to visit. I called in favors in Chicago, knowing some chefs in the food industry, but to no avail, as there were so many federal regulations. I spent a week studying with Debbie Fleming Caffrey, a prominent Southern photographer in Louisiana in the mid-1990s. It was no problem gaining access to a slaughterhouse there. The place we visited slaughtered pigs with guns, and the experience was very traumatic, to put it mildly. I took many, many photographs, had a fitful night of sleep, and threw up the next morning. Needless to say, I became a vegetarian for a bit. What did come out of that shoot, though, was that I learned that the pig heart is the same size as the human heart, and it felt like it would be a perfect metaphor, so I made a self-portrait. I worked for some time with pig hearts, and my models were very tolerant and generous in their willingness to work with me. Continuing my inquiry, I was lucky to participate in a program, Chicago in the year 2000, funded by the former Gary Comer of Land's End. Mr. Comer loved Chicago and thought it would be wonderful to have photographers photograph the city for the year. I was able to work with a hospice group and covered a couple on the north side, Joe and Gloria, who were joined in common law marriage. Joe had advanced Parkinson's disease. This project, along with so many other things I have photographed, was so important in my gaining a clearer understanding of death and dying. I do remember feeling the limitations of the subject matter, as it seemed to focus more on the physicality of our bodies and less on the spiritual side of our existence. And I'm going to just take a real quick plug for Lori's Grace and Dine project that she did in the prison systems in Louisiana, which cuts through everything. I mean, it was the most beautiful project where inmates were administering to each other in hospice as people were dying. So you should look into that if you can.
Thank you, Jane.
Yeah. And then one day, Gloria pulls out a t-shirt that says, "I believe I can fly." So she puts it on Joe, and I was able to make this photograph. Working with hospice patients took a personal toll on me. I was consumed with death. I subsequently gave notice and said that I needed to wrap up the project. I was coaxed by the director of City 2000, Rich Cahan, to photograph a day of kite flying on the south side of Chicago, a great counterbalance to what I had been doing. By the way, I became a hospice volunteer after this project. I also attended autopsies and have participated in the ritual bathing of bodies in preparation for burial. I have sought out any subject that might further my understanding of the death and dying process. I'm going to take a slight detour here, but it's important work about the environment, and especially relevant today as we're confronted with the effects of climate change. As I watched the events unfold after 9/11, I decided to sign up for disaster relief training with the American Red Cross. I finished the course shortly before Hurricane Katrina hit the South. With my children grown and my love for all things Louisiana, I decided to volunteer with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. I was assigned to a mental health team of 16 professionals stationed in the lower Ninth Ward. The city started a program called Look and Leave, hoping that by inviting the residents back to view the remains of their homes, they would be comfortable leaving. I had no intention of photographing, as I had left my Hasselblad film camera behind. I took a small digital camera with me. I was so overwhelmed and traumatized by what I had been seeing and hearing that I decided I needed to do more, and I decided to tell the story photographically. Every day I would get up early in the morning and photograph around the edges of the enclosed community before I reported to work, and then I would photograph again at the end of the day. The photography helped me to process the experience and share it with others. I photographed the remains of a community with an eye toward any hint of renewal. And if you look to the right of the shoe, you'll notice a green blade of grass, which for me, I didn't see it when I was photographing, but when I was printing it, it helped me to feel hopeful. This photograph is a church pew that was sitting outside the Battleground Church in the lower Ninth Ward, with the dried mud and a green plant offering hope after the devastation of the community. This work was eventually turned into a book titled the name of the program, Look and Leave, Photographs and Stories of New Orleans' Lower Ninth Ward. This work is titled Crude Awakening and was created fast and furiously after the Deep Horizon BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. It was my response to the wildly circulated photograph of the Pelican drenched in oil. I was outraged while reading on Facebook about how my fellow photographers in Louisiana were being refused access to cover the spill, and it was my way of adding to the dialogue. The work was created on the shores of Lake Michigan, all, people that were just summering on the beaches, and everybody wanted to be involved in the project. Many years were spent exploring life cycles, and all of this contributed to the creation of the burn. In 2007, I received an acceptance letter from the Ragdale Foundation in Lake Forest, Illinois, to attend an artist residency. Having time at Ragdale was a game changer for me. The property is located on a magnificent prairie. Many of the artists walk on the prairie while in residency. It was a wonderful place for contemplation. While there in October of 2007, I was taking a walk and I came upon a very small controlled burn. I took a few photographs, picked up some ash and charcoal to take back to my studio, and asked if I could follow them the following spring. I mean, who isn't fascinated by fire? That spring, my first grandchild was born within weeks of my sister being diagnosed with ovarian cancer. The cycle of life was very much on my mind. In April, I called the Lake Forest Open Lands to see when they would be burning. It turns out they were going out that very morning, which happened to coincide with my sister's very first chemotherapy treatment. It was a very intense time. As I looked through the camera's viewfinder, I kept thinking about the parallels between what I was seeing in the prairie and what was happening in my sister's body, as the chemotherapy was an attempt to also clear out invasive cells to make room for healthy tissue to regenerate. So began 9 years of following the Lake Forest Open Lands restoration ecologists. Burns take place in the spring and fall and only under certain specific weather conditions. It's a transitional time when the boundaries between seasons dissolve and birds begin their migratory flights. Controlling and photographing burns is arduous and potentially dangerous. I try to stay ahead of the smoke, but often, because of the angle of the sun or the way the wind is blowing, I need to push myself into it. The smoke can be blinding, and the heat is sometimes so overwhelming that I must leave the site for relief. The smell and sensation of the burn permeates everything I carry, clinging to me for days. Controlled burns are used to restore and maintain natural habitat by reducing dead plant material, removing invasive species, and enriching the soil. There are certain seeds that actually require the intense heat of fires to germinate. The day this image was taken, I thought it was going to be my last time photographing the burn. Then this happened, and I thought maybe the burn wasn't done with me. It's falling ash. I did go out the next time to try to recreate this, and of course I was unable to. The smoke both conceals and reveals. While flames leap from the earth, the densely layered landscape is enveloped in veils that are alternately transparent, translucent, and opaque. The foreground melts into the background in the quickly changing terrain, altering one's sense of scale and space. Reference points and orientation are intentionally obscured. I have no interest in realistically rendering the landscape. Rather, I look for visual references of a place that my mind cannot grasp, a place in which the sublime resides, inviting a state of quiet meditation. Photographing the burn throughout my sister's illness gave me a guidepost for helping me to understand the nature of all living things. Although burns are violent and destructive by nature, they're also regenerative. Prairies and other natural habitats depend on fire for the procreation of native species. To witness and photograph a controlled burn is to place oneself in the presence of a certain terrible beauty. I attempt to capture the ephemeral moment when life and death are not opposed, but are harmonized as a single process to be embraced as one. This image was taken the day after my sister passed, November 19th, 2012, and it is in the center of the book that was published by Keher Verlag in 2013 titled The Burn. This work is titled Circle of Ash. Winds sigh in the bittersweet hour. Fires of crimson red rearrange the landscape into a starless carpet of charred remains. Suspended above clear dark waters, ashes take flight on the wings of possibility. So I live close to Lake Michigan, and I love to swim. A few summers ago, I had a crazy idea about swimming across the lake. I called the Coast Guard to see if that was even possible and learned that a group had just completed a relay swim to raise money for cancer research. It seemed like a perfect fit, so I signed up. And my early morning training sessions in the water were, of course, compromised because I carried a small point-and-shoot underwater camera with me. It turns out I did more photographing than swimming that summer. Every time I saw something floating by, I had to stop, tread water, and photograph. And that's how I ended up with so many photographs from Lake Michigan. The relay swim was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, especially because my turn to swim was at 2:30 in the morning. There were huge waves and plenty of moonlight. After my turn, I passed out on the bow of the boat. I saw 3 shooting stars and quickly passed out. About 6 years ago, I was on a 4-hour train ride in France en route to Arles. I had my iPad with me that included files from both the burn and Lake Michigan. I also happened to have an app that allowed me to combine the images. I explored working with the app, which is called Union, and realized that there was something more to explore. When I returned home, I worked on this concept in earnest. This is how the Fire and Water series came about. Many hours were spent auditioning the pairing of the fire and water photographs. I've spent a few weeks every summer since my mid-20s in northern Wisconsin. A few years ago, we took the rowboat out into an area that my granddaughter aptly named Fairy Shallows. It all started with photographing underwater. That was the beginning of my love affair with water lilies. The following summer, I started thinking about the water lilies as abstractions, paying more attention to their form. My point of reference were paintings by Miro, Kandinsky, and Paul Klee. I started shooting while standing on a paddleboard because it gave me the perspective that I needed. It was a little risky, but I was careful with my equipment and I made sure I was steady. The season for water lilies is fleeting, as is the light. I head out at daybreak, camera and paddle in hand, as I skim the surface of the water. The fertile, primordial muck at the bottom of the lake gives birth to new life. Their beauty astonishes me with their geometric forms and lyrical rhythms, a springboard for the imagination. Water lilies are my equivalents, abstract manifestations of an inner state where the unknowable resides. Imagine the lily, who may also be a part of God, would sing to you if it could sing, if you would pause to hear it. And how are you so certain, anyway, that it doesn't sing? Mary Oliver. 2 summers ago, I went out to Fairy Shallows with my 8-year-old grandson. He got off the paddleboard and started walking around in the muck and pulled up these gorgeous translucent water lilies languishing at the bottom of the lake. That was the beginning of taking the abstractions even further. One never knows where the inspiration will come from. It's all about paying attention and being open to possibility. The inspiration for this body of work was a bouquet of flowers I received as a gift in the spring of 2019. Every day, I arranged the flowers using a series of vases, sometimes adding fruit, and photographed them in the early morning light in my kitchen window. I thought of the images as simply a response to the beauty of the flowers. And of course, responses and associations are rarely simple. As the flowers begin to wilt, I was just as compelled by the ranunculus's serpentine droop and the gentle splash of peony petals. Thus, these still lives became a series, and its theme was one that has run through almost all of my photographic work, even if in different guises, the ephemeral nature of all things. And just because I can, I thought I would show you some more experimental works. I've worked with cyanotype, also known as sun prints. Cyanotype is one of the oldest photographic printing processes that produces prints in a distinctive dark greenish blue. The word cyan comes from the Greek, meaning dark blue substance. This piece was created while in an artist residency in Norway. I placed stones on the chemically treated paper and exposed it to sunlight and salt water. Having spent a considerable amount of time in New Orleans, I have become obsessed with trying to translate music into a visual art experience. This has been an ongoing challenge. I bought a player piano roll in a resale shop and have been experimenting for a couple of years now with it. This piece was created coating player piano roll paper with the cyanotype chemicals and exposing it to the sun. The piece is titled "When the Moon Turns to Gold," the song of the player piano papers I used to create it. And here's a close-up. And who doesn't like wax? I've used wax with my photographs many years back, trying to create real-time luminosity. I decided to experiment further with it, making vessels, and these are made with balloons and cold water and hot wax, which can be explosive at times. Given my ongoing fascination with fire, I also decided to burn some of my portfolios, thinking about the ephemeral nature of all things. Oops. I emptied the ash into the vessels and hung them from a ceiling in an experimental show in 2018 at Photolucida. And the title of the piece is Carry Me Home. And if some of you have been following me on Instagram, you know about these sushi boxes that were created the past few months while I sheltered in place in Berkeley, California with my daughter and son-in-law. Every day I went for walks and collected found objects and made them into assemblages. As some of you may know, my husband passed away peacefully in his sleep a year and a half ago. Needless to say, there has been a dramatic shift in my life. All the work that I have done trying to understand the nature of all things has been helpful and comforting during this transitional time. An aside, the title for the gardens was actually created for a pop-up restaurant that we did in our home some 30 years ago. When we had the memorial for my husband, we lit up this neon sign above our doorway that was made for the restaurant, and I had to reassure the guests that the sign was not created for the memorial. I can't hear anybody laughing. Whatever.
Laughed.
Okay.
It was more like a breathy smile.
Right. My husband spent his last few years tearing up our lawn and putting in a native garden. Perhaps it was his answer to climate change and the chaotic times in our country. Watching him seed our garden in the autumn of his years was, well, poetic. How does one simple tulip bring so much joy? I remember when Howard was tearing up our lawn and planting the garden, I asked him, "Who's going to take care of these gardens when you're gone?" He just smiled. Little did I know that it was going to be the greatest gift he could have given to me. The Way It Is by William Stafford. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you're pursuing. You have to explain about the thread. But it is hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen. People get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. So that's the end of my talk. I'm going to stop the share, go back into internet land, right?
Thank you. I want to see all of those images as prints because they're almost too much to even take in digitally, and I know they must be so beautiful in real life, but they're astounding. Thank you so much. Let's either write in questions or put your hand up, and I can just call on you to unmute for questions for Jane. And there is a question about the app and layering images. What is the app's name? Let's just get the technical.
It's called Union.
Union. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. How do you create the black backgrounds in your photos?
Well, with the water lilies, I photographed early in the morning when there's no clouds, so there's no reflection in the water, and then I would darken the water in Photoshop. The plants, the still lifes were all taken on black velvet. I love black velvet. I love black spaces. I don't know why, but I just do. So I use a lot of black velvet. I've even used it to photograph my grandchildren when they were newborns.
That's great. Nanette writes, I've always wanted to hear about your inspirations, and I agree with you, Nanette. That's why she talked tonight. I guess, I just want to repeat the thing that caught me just made me pause in the middle of all of it was when you said when life and death are not opposed, and all of a sudden everything, speaking of inspirations, it just brought it forward. All the work that I've seen, and then of course I've seen so much more tonight than I had before. I've never seen your hospice work, so that was really truly amazing.
Well, I have to just share just a follow-up. My son lives in Seattle, and we went on a walk a few years ago, and it was after my parents had died and my sister had died, and there was this dead log in the forest, and there was this new log coming up out of the dead log, and it was like this epiphany. It's like, oh my God, it's so okay that they died, because look at what's going on. They're giving life to, this tree was giving life to new life. And everything kind of fell into place for me. And then I found out there's a term for that. It's called nursing logs. Mm-hmm. And when I was out on the West Coast, the past several months, I had a chance to see some more of them. And it's really, it's an important concept. It is a circle, and we're all here because of, our ancestors. And they're affecting us, all the time, I think, whether we know it or not. But that whole notion of the circle of life, really, I saw it in nature. I saw it in the burns. It's there. I'm not making it up to make myself feel better.
I don't think anybody thought so. I think that's why I love to see your work, is because it just makes me pause and be quiet and just appreciate your connections that you're making for me personally, and how I guess I can understand your pause and understand. It's extraordinary to see the beauty that you can bring into your photographs.
Thank you. And I have to say too that the past 4 years has been so challenging for everybody living in this country and in the world. And I made a concerted effort to try to find light and beauty. It was really important to me, and it was nourishing. And it's interesting because I have a body of work called Morning Light, and I was taken in Auschwitz in the gas chamber with a Holga camera, and I didn't realize I was in the gas chamber. And then when I realized that, I just took photographs of light that was coming through the walls. And there was light coming in. Mm-hmm. And I think that's been a theme. I think it's a theme for a lot of photographers, obviously, right?
Right. We work in that. Anne writes, can you say a little bit more about how your journaling informs your photography practice? Thank you for a beautiful presentation.
Oh, thank you. When I first started out, I was writing every day. There's The Artist's Way by Judith Cameron, and I actually just read the beginning of it, enough to get me going at that time, and I was writing every day 3 pages. I didn't care what I was writing about. I didn't care about punctuation. I knew nobody was going to read it, but it was by doing that writing, I was able to get in touch with sort of this really deep part of myself about what really was important to me. And it was, whether I felt connected to myself or others, and whether I felt abandoned. And then I got even deeper. I said, okay, so where is that first abandonment or whatever? And it's really the moment the umbilical cord is cut. We're disconnected from, our source. And then when is the last one? And it's in the last breath. So that was it. That just set it all up for me. And I think it's a really good practice. I actually don't do it that much anymore, but I wish I did, because I think it's a really good practice. As our morning walks.
Right.
Yeah.
Gano, I hope I said that right. Right. So beautiful and deceptively simple. What photographers do you like to view? Other visual sources of inspiration? ?
Well, Edward Weston was one of my favorites. I was really inspired by him. Judith Cameron, I love the pictorialists, even though I know that, some people think that's not so cool, but I love them. I love the more painterly artists. I'm going to have to think about that some more. Yeah. And I love artwork, looking at artwork, painters, going to museums, And music. Music really is inspiring to me too. I actually wish that I had been a musician, and my father said to me, "It's not too late." But I haven't. I actually did try taking up drumming this past fall, and maybe I'll continue with that. But there's something about music; it just is so immediate. You feel it in your body, and I've been struggling with this piano player papers, and I have some more ideas. I'm not done yet.
Are you making the calligraphy? Where is the calligraphy coming from?
No, those are on the papers.
Oh.
Yeah. It's in the roll. Yeah.
Okay. Mary asks, she says, "Thank you, Jane. It is always great to see your work, hear your words about it, and your written inspiration. As I see your work again, I see this continued conversation you have with your subject and the idea. Are you thinking about this as you are creating the work? You seem to go deeper and deeper into the conversation within each project."
I think that's a function of age, maybe. Lived experience, maybe. Life experiences, maybe. I have really used photography to help me figure stuff out. I didn't really go into it to try to do anything other than understand my life. And, as I've been met with challenges, I've turned the camera, on those challenges. My projects, I've never gone out looking for the projects, they've found me. And I've always trusted that. And I also, the other thing, I could share is that I take photographs every day, and I've used Instagram as a way to, it's like a daily practice. And as a photographer, I think 7 years ago, I had a nephew that said, "Why aren't you on Instagram? You're a photographer. You should." And I was thinking, why should I be on Instagram? And now, I look back, and my goal was just to try to make one good picture a day. And I remember when my father was in the hospital, I was in that hospital room, and I was trying to find the light. And I look back on my Instagram feed, and it's like a diary. It's just like a diary of my life. I love it. I know exactly where I was and what I was doing, and all those feelings come back. So it's a great practice, and everybody can do it.
That's cool. Larry writes, "I'm so intrigued by the fact that you came to photography in your 40s. What was the catalyst that led you to take that first class?"
We were going on a trip, and I got a new camera. And I took the class at this art center. I had no intention of being a photographer. In fact, I don't want to insult anybody, but I thought photography was for obsessive compulsive people, because it was all about whether you go two seconds more, 5 seconds less to get the right tonality. I didn't get it. And my teacher it wasn't really about photography. It was more about how you live your life. And he was challenging me all the time, and it was like philosophy. And I think it was him that got me into it. And then, there was this one defining moment where it was like, oh, now I get black and white photography. I hadn't really understood it. And I remember that image that I took and seen it come up in the tray. But I've always loved to make things, and I wasn't exactly a good drawer, but I was a pretty, not accomplished quilter, but I made a lot of quilts before I came into photography. And I was always crafting as a kid.
Mm.
And the boxes that I just finished just gave me so much pleasure.
Yeah,
it was so fun to actually, handle the objects. I just loved it. It was really fun.
That's great. And they're not photographed alone, but they're photographed as a tile, as a quilt.
I did groups of 3, and I'm not sure how I'm going to hang them, but yeah, that's how I photographed them for Instagram.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, there's lots of amazing, wonderful, supportive things about for you to read, and I can share that with you later. Thank you for sharing the ongoing response to the light in your life. You continue to be an inspiration. There's lots of those. Thank you, Marcia and Madison. Does anybody else have any more questions?
I had a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I posted it in the chat. It's sort of answered. So Jane told me she was a quilter, because I'm an art quilter and I see quilting in her photography. So there you go. I just wanted to know if you've ever thought of having some of your photographs turned into, fabric, like Andover or something like that. I'm friends with Lonnie Rossi. I don't know if you know Lonnie. She's local, but she used to use a lot of cyanotype, the sun in her fabrics line that she had for Andover for a number of years. And of course, I know there's a lot of art quilters in Seattle.
Right. I photographed I had some images of my sister in a pool with light, and I printed that on chiffon, and I love it. I don't think I've ever shown it. It's hanging in my studio. I made a quilt last year, a cyanotype quilt for one of my new grandchildren. Yeah, I love fabric. Who knows? It may show up again in my work somehow, somewhere. I don't know. And I love, threads and mending and all that.
I hope so. It's beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Anybody
Jen,
else? Harris, great.
how are you? It's good to see you. I just want to say I'm thrilled to see your work. And as you know, we've known each other a long time. And the one thing I've always liked about it is it's kind of a gentle progression. You've been consistent. You've had to deal with quite a lot of different traumas and events. And through it all, you've always worked. Not always quickly, sometimes slowly, sometimes more quickly, but you've always, had this kind of, I think, gentle but consistent revision of your vision. And so we see the progress of the burn work, which you remember I really loved, and of course the work of your husband, and then the progress of that. So I just want to say I'm really honored to see your work tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I didn't really put this in the talk, but I wasn't kidding about the garden. I was not a gardener. Howard did all the gardening. And I am finding I get so much pleasure out of being in the garden and photographing the garden. And I am thinking about possibly doing another book called Still Life. It's kind of a play on the words. And so I'm going to continue doing that, photographing the garden and the seasons and all that. I mean, what else is there to do, right? It gives me a whole lot of pleasure. So.
Well, I just want to thank you again.
Oh, thank you. I like your beard.
Oh, thank you.
COVID, you want to see my hair?
It's so high maintenance, you know?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Hi, Peggy.
So I also wrote this in the chat, but they didn't get to it. And that is, I find your photographs so filled with emotion, and the reactions that I have are so strong. And I'm wondering, are you thinking about the messages that you're sending when you're taking the pictures? Or are you thinking more about composition and light and more technical things?
You know, mostly I'm not thinking.
Mm-hmm.
What I have found, I think I found this over time, is that the more I can get myself out of the picture, the stronger it is. I mean, of course, I'm looking at composition, and I'm attracted to something, and I'm trying to frame it. But you know, it's funny because Michael Weinstein, who was a critic in Chicago, who's passed away a while ago, he wrote something about my work, and he called me the emotive photographer. And I'm thinking, what is he talking? I didn't know what he was talking about. But I think that's just what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And who you are, I guess.
And who I am, yeah. Right. It's been a really good tool for me to process my life and help me to come to terms with things that, you know, have been really hard.
Yeah. Thanks. This was great.
Thank you.
Michael and Wynn write, Jane, well, we've shared your journey and work through the years. It was inspiring to see the thread, and your art moves through time. Your openness to new materials and special way of seeing life is a gift to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's lovely.
Thank you.
I would like to thank everyone for coming tonight. This was a really special evening. Jane, I'm so glad you could share your work tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I want to invite everyone back next week. We're featuring Elizabeth Bick, also a New Orleanian soul. She'll be presenting her work. She's based in Brooklyn now, and I hope you can come back next week to listen to Elizabeth share her work.
Thanks, everyone. And thank you so much, Jane, for such an inspiring talk. It was great to hear about your work and your practice, and great to see everyone here tonight. And hopefully we'll see you next week.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me. And thank everybody. It's so good to see so many wonderful faces. Oh my God. So sweet.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.